The morning sun cast long shadows across the mining facility on Kepler 442b as Lisa Martinez adjusted her geological scanner. The 20-year-old student from Earth had been working on this distant world for 3 months, collecting rock samples and mapping mineral deposits. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her face showed the focused concentration of someone who truly loved her work. Lisa had always been curious about everything around her. Even as a child back in Arizona, she would spend hours examining rocks and asking endless questions about how planets formed. Her parents, Admiral Kate Martinez and Dr. Paul Martinez, had encouraged her scientific interests, though they worried about her adventurous spirit that led her to volunteer for assignments on remote worlds. The Valdari Empire controlled this mining world, just like they controlled 847 other star systems across the galaxy. For the past 50 years, humans had lived under Valdari rule, and most people accepted it as simply the way things were. The Valdari were tall, gray-skinned beings with large dark eyes and superior technology. They viewed humans as a primitive species that needed guidance and control. Lisa walked carefully along the rocky canyon, her scanner beeping steadily as it analyzed the geological formations. She was supposed to stay within the designated human work areas, but her curiosity had led her further than planned. The readings on her device were showing something unusual buried deep in the rock face ahead. As she climbed over a large boulder, Lisa suddenly found herself looking at something that made her blood run cold. Hidden in the canyon was a massive, metal structure that definitely was not supposed to be there. It was clearly Valdari technology, but it was not marked on any of the official maps she had been given. Weapons and strange machinery were visible through transparent sections of the building. Lisa quickly activated her emergency transmitter and began recording everything she could see. Her hands shook as she realized she had stumbled onto what appeared to be a secret military installation. She knew she needed to get this information back to the human authorities immediately. Before she could retreat, bright lights suddenly surrounded her. Valdari soldiers in dark armor emerged from hidden positions, their weapons pointed directly at her. Lisa raised her hands and tried to explain that she was just doing geological work, but the soldiers did not seem interested in her explanations. Captain Jake Sullivan received the emergency call at the human diplomatic station 3 hours later. As Earth's representative to the Valdari government on Kepler 442b, Jake had spent 5 years trying to maintain peaceful relations. He was a calm man in his 40s who believed that patience and diplomacy could solve most problems. When Jake arrived at the Valdari detention center, he was told that Lisa had been caught spying on a classified military facility. The charges were serious and the Valdari High Command was already involved. Jake tried to explain that Lisa was just a geology student who had wandered into the wrong area by accident, but his words fell on deaf ears. Supreme Chancellor Zexhai himself arrived on Kepler 442b within 24 hours. The supreme leader of the Valdari Empire was an imposing figure, nearly 7 feet tall with piercing dark eyes that seemed to see through everything. He had ruled the empire for 30 years and had never shown mercy to those who opposed him. Jake met with the Supreme Chancellor and pleaded for Lisa's release. He explained her background, her family, and her innocent intentions. He offered to take full responsibility for the incident and promised that humans would stay away from all restricted areas in the future. Zexhai listened to Jake's words with cold indifference. In his view, humans were becoming too comfortable. Under Valdari rule, they needed to be reminded of their place in the galactic order. This incident provided the perfect opportunity to send that message. The Supreme Chancellor made his decision quickly and without emotion. Lisa Martinez would be executed publicly as an example to all humans across the Empire. The execution would be broadcast live to every world under Valdari control, so that no one could claim ignorance of the consequences of defying Imperial authority. Jake felt his heart sink as he heard the announcement. He immediately sent urgent messages to Earth, hoping that Admiral Martinez or someone with more influence could intervene. But the Valdari had already begun preparations for the broadcast. On Earth, Lisa's younger brother Danny Martinez was working late in his quantum physics laboratory when he received the emergency message. Danny was 25 years old and had inherited his family's intelligence and determination. When he read that his sister was going to be executed, he immediately contacted his parents and began spreading the word through every communication channel he could access. The news reached Admiral Kate Martinez while she was reviewing strategic reports at Earth Defense Command. Kate was known throughout the human military as a brilliant tactician who never let emotions cloud her judgment. But when she learned that her daughter was going to die, something cold and hard settled in her chest. Dr. Paul Martinez was giving a lecture on xenobiology when his assistant interrupted with the urgent message. Paul had spent decades studying alien species, including the Valdari. He understood their culture and psychology better than almost any human alive. He knew that once they made this kind of public decision, they would not change their minds. The execution was scheduled for the following day at noon, Valdari Standard Time. It would be broadcast simultaneously across all 847 systems of the Empire, reaching billions of viewers. The Valdari wanted every species under their rule to see what happened to those who challenged their authority. Lisa spent her final night in a small cell, writing messages to her family on a data pad that Jake had managed to get to her. She was scared, but she tried to stay strong. She wrote about her love for her parents and brother, about her dreams of becoming a planetary geologist, and about her hope that her death might somehow serve a greater purpose. The broadcast began exactly at noon. Supreme Chancellor Zexai himself introduced the proceedings, explaining that Lisa Martinez was a spy who had threatened Imperial security. He spoke about the need for order and the consequences of defiance. Lisa was brought to the execution platform, wearing simple gray clothing. Her hands were bound, but her head was held high. When given the chance to speak her final words, she looked directly into the camera and said clearly, "Tell my family I love them, and tell them I'm sorry I couldn't come home." The molecular disintegrator activated with a bright flash of light. Lisa Martinez simply disappeared, her atoms scattered into the void. The broadcast continued for several more minutes as Zexai delivered a speech about imperial justice and the fate of those who opposed Valdari rule. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the execution. Most species saw it as a reminder to obey imperial law. But among humans, something very different was happening. In homes and workplaces, on ships and stations, humans were watching their screens with expressions that the Valdari had never seen before. Danny Martinez sat in his laboratory, staring at the empty space where his sister had been standing moments before. Around him, his equipment hummed quietly, but he did not hear it. All he could think about were the last words Lisa had spoken and the cold satisfaction in the Supreme Chancellor's voice. What the Valdari did not understand was that they had just made the greatest mistake in the history of their empire. They had killed someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. And humans, unlike other species they had conquered, did not forget such things. Dr. Amy Chen sat in her underground laboratory beneath the Colorado mountains, watching the execution broadcast on multiple screens. To anyone looking at her, she appeared to be just another scientist studying alien technology. But Amy was much more than that. For the past 20 years, she had been the director of humanity's most classified project. Project Prometheus had begun in secret shortly after the Valdari conquest of Earth. While most humans accepted their new rulers, a small group of military leaders and scientists had started preparing for the day when humanity might need to defend itself. They called it an insurance policy, something they hoped would never be needed. Amy had watched Lisa Martinez grow up through family photos that Admiral Kate Martinez sometimes shared. She had seen the bright young woman develop into a promising scientist. Now she watched that same young woman disappear in a flash of light, and Amy felt something cold settle in her stomach. As the broadcast ended, Amy's hands moved across her control panel with practiced efficiency. Deep beneath the mountain, massive computers came to life. Satellites hidden throughout the solar system began transmitting coded signals. And across the galaxy, humans who had been living normal lives suddenly received messages that changed everything. The message was simple and had been prepared years ago. It contained just 3 words: Protocol 7 active. But for thousands of humans scattered across Valdari space, Those 3 words meant it was time to reveal who they really were. Captain Ben Rodriguez was loading cargo containers onto his freight ship at a Valdari trade station when his communicator buzzed. Ben appeared to be exactly what his identification papers said. A simple cargo hauler from Earth who transported goods between human colonies. He had been doing this job for 8 years, and the Valdari security forces barely noticed him anymore. Ben read the message and felt his heart begin to race. He had trained for this moment, but he had never expected it to actually happen. He finished loading his cargo as if nothing had changed, but his mind was already shifting into a different mode of thinking. In his ship's hidden compartments, Ben had weapons and equipment that the Valdari had never discovered. More importantly, he had detailed maps of Valdari military installations, shipping routes, and communication networks. For 8 years, he had been gathering intelligence while pretending to be nothing more than a simple trader. Dr. Lucy Thompson was working late, in her laboratory on Valdari Prime, the capital world of the Empire. She was officially a xenobiologist studying human adaptation to different planetary environments. The Valdari considered her research useful but harmless. They had no idea that Lucy was actually studying them. When Lucy received the coded message, she calmly saved her work and began shutting down her equipment. Then she walked to a storage closet and removed a device that looked like a simple data storage unit. In reality, it was one of the most sophisticated computer viruses ever created by human programmers. Lucy connected the device to the main research network and activated it. The virus immediately began copying itself throughout the Valdari computer systems. It was designed to lay dormant for exactly 33 minutes before activating. When it did activate, it would cause massive damage to everything connected to the Valdari information network. Tony Garcia was finishing his shift at the largest Valdari shipyard in the galaxy. Tony had been working as a maintenance technician for 6 years, and he knew every system and every ship that passed through the facility. The Valdari valued his technical skills and trusted him with increasingly important repairs. What they did not know was that Tony had been subtly modifying their ships during routine maintenance. Nothing that would be noticed during normal operations, but small changes that could be activated remotely when needed. Tony had also been mapping the shipyard security systems and identifying critical structural weaknesses. Tony received his message while calibrating a navigation system on a Valdari battlecruiser. He continued working normally, but he began activating tiny devices he had hidden throughout the shipyard over the years. In 33 minutes, those devices would create a cascade of failures that would cripple the entire facility. On Earth, Danny Martinez was no longer alone in his laboratory. Within hours of Lisa's execution, hundreds of people had gathered at secret locations around the planet. These were not soldiers or government officials. They were teachers, doctors, engineers, shop owners, and students. But they all had one thing in common. They were part of a network that had been preparing for this day. Danny stood before a wall of communication equipment, coordinating with human cells across the galaxy. Each group had been given specific targets and timing. The plan was incredibly complex, involving thousands of people performing thousands of different actions, all synchronized to happen within the same 33-minute window. The number, 33, had been chosen carefully. It was long enough to allow all human agents to receive their instructions and prepare for action, but it was short enough that the Valdari would not have time to understand what was happening and organize a response. Admiral Kate Martinez was in her office at Earth Defense Command, but she was not acting as a military officer. She was acting as a mother who had just watched her daughter die. The resources of Earth's military were now focused on a single goal: making the Valdari pay for what they had done. Kate had access to information that even the Valdari did not know existed. For decades, human intelligence services had been infiltrating alien governments, businesses, and institutions. They had human agents in positions of trust throughout Valdari society. All of those agents were now being activated simultaneously. Dr. Paul Martinez was using his knowledge of Valdari biology in ways he had never intended. In his laboratory, he was preparing biological agents that would target specific weaknesses in Valdari physiology. These agents would not kill. but they would cause temporary paralysis and confusion. They would be released into the air and water, systems of key Valdari installations. What made this plan so dangerous was not its military precision but its emotional foundation. Every human involved was not following orders from a government or military command. They were responding to the death of Lisa Martinez as if she had been their own daughter or sister. The Valdari had conquered many species over the centuries. They understood how defeated populations usually responded. Most species would protest, negotiate, or at worst organize small-scale resistance movements. But humans were different in a way the Valdari had never recognized. Supreme Chancellor Zexhai was in his palace on Valdari Prime, reviewing reports from across the Empire. The execution had been broadcast successfully, and initial reports suggested that humans were responding as expected. There had been some protests and demonstrations, but nothing that threatened imperial authority. What Zexhai did not understand was that humans had never been truly conquered. They had submitted to Valdari rule because they were not yet ready to resist effectively, but they had been using the time to prepare, to learn, and to position themselves for the moment when resistance became possible. The execution of Lisa Martinez had not been a demonstration of Valdari power. It had been a declaration of war against a species that the Valdari had never bothered to truly understand. And in less than 33 minutes, the Valdari Empire would begin to learn exactly what humans were capable of when someone hurt their family. Across the galaxy, humans were moving into position. They were not acting as soldiers or rebels. They were acting as human beings who had just watched an innocent young woman die for no reason other than imperial arrogance. And that, as the Valdari were about to discover, made them far more dangerous than any army. At exactly 33 minutes after Lisa Martinez had died, something unprecedented happened across the Valdari Empire. On 847 different worlds, in thousands of locations, humans who had been living quietly under alien rule suddenly became something else entirely. Captain Ben Rodriguez was approaching the main Valdari fleet base when his chronometer reached the designated time. Without hesitation, he activated systems that had been hidden in his cargo ship for years. What appeared to be simple shipping containers suddenly opened to reveal advanced human military equipment. Ben's ship transformed from a harmless freighter into a sophisticated attack vessel. He immediately began targeting the communication arrays that connected the fleet base to the rest of the Empire. The Valdari defenders were completely unprepared for an attack from what they thought was a friendly cargo ship. At the same moment, Dr. Lucy Thompson's virus activated throughout the Valdari computer networks. The program had been spreading silently for 33 minutes, copying itself into every connected system on Valdari Prime. Now it began its real work. Government databases started deleting themselves. Military communication systems began broadcasting random signals. Banking networks froze, trapping trillions of credits in digital limbo. The virus was not just destroying data. It was specifically targeting the systems that the Valdari used to control their empire. Lucy calmly walked out of her laboratory as alarms began sounding throughout the research facility. Valdari security guards rushed past her, trying to understand what was happening to their computer systems. None of them suspected that the quiet human scientist they barely noticed was responsible for the chaos. Tony Garcia's modifications to the Valdari shipyard activated with devastating precision. Navigation systems in dozens of ships began showing false readings. Life support systems started cycling randomly. Most critically, the shipyard's automated construction systems began tearing apart the ships they were supposed to be building. The largest Valdari battlecruiser in the facility suddenly found its engines firing at full power while still locked in its construction cradle. The massive ship tore itself apart, sending debris cascading through the shipyard. Secondary explosions began as fuel. Lines ruptured and power systems overloaded. Tony watched from a safe distance as years of careful sabotage came together in a symphony of destruction. The Valdari had trusted him to maintain their ships, and he had used that trust to learn exactly how to destroy them. On dozens of other worlds, humans were revealing capabilities that the Valdari had never suspected. Steve Patterson, who worked as a power plant technician on the industrial world of Nexus 7, simultaneously overloaded 3 fusion reactors. The resulting blackout plunged the entire planet into darkness and shut down the factories that produced Valdari military equipment. Dr. Maria Santos, a human physician working in a Valdari hospital, released biological agents she had been developing in secret. The agents spread quickly through the air circulation systems, causing temporary paralysis in Valdari nervous systems. Within minutes, the entire government complex on her world was filled with Valdari officials who could not move or speak. Carlos Rivera had spent 5 years working as a financial analyst in the Valdari Central Bank. In those 5 years, he had gained access to the economic systems that kept the entire empire functioning. Now he used that access to crash the Valdari stock markets, freeze interstellar trade, and transfer massive amounts of money into accounts that would fund human resistance operations. The attacks were not random acts of violence. Every human agent had been given specific targets that would maximize damage to the Empire's ability to function. They struck at communication networks, transportation systems, power grids, and government facilities. But most importantly, they struck at the Valdari sense of security and superiority. Supreme Chancellor Zexhai was in his throne room when the first reports began arriving. A communication officer rushed in to report that they were losing contact with several worlds. Then another officer reported computer system failures across the capital planet. Then came news of attacks on military installations. At first, Zexhai assumed they were dealing with separate incidents, perhaps some technical failures, maybe a few isolated terrorist attacks. But as the reports continued to flood in, he began to realize that something much larger was happening. Every attack was happening simultaneously. Every attacker was human. And the attacks were coordinated with a precision that suggested years of planning. Zexhai felt a cold fear beginning to grow in his chest as he realized that the humans had been preparing for this moment since the day they were conquered. The Valdari military tried to respond, but they discovered that humans had infiltrated their forces as well. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, who had been serving loyally in the Valdari Navy for 7 years, suddenly seized control of her ship's bridge and began attacking other vessels in the fleet. Commander Alex Brown, stationed at a Valdari communications hub, started broadcasting a single message on all frequencies. "This is for Lisa Martinez." The message was repeated in every human language and began spreading across the galaxy faster than the Valdari could block it. What terrified the Valdari most was not the scale of the attacks, but the motivation behind them. This was not a military conquest or a political revolution. This was something they had never encountered before, an entire species acting as a single family, seeking revenge for one of their own. On Earth, Admiral Kate Martinez was coordinating the largest intelligence operation in human history. Her daughter's death had activated sleeper agents who had been positioned throughout Valdari society for decades. These were not professional spies, but ordinary humans who had been living normal lives while secretly gathering information and preparing for this moment. The Valdari had always seen humans as individuals who could be controlled through fear or reward. They had never understood that humans were capable of thinking and acting as a collective when threatened. The execution of Lisa Martinez had transformed every human in the galaxy into a potential enemy. Dr. Paul Martinez's biological agents were being deployed on 17 different worlds simultaneously. The compounds caused temporary paralysis in Valdari physiology, but were harmless to other species. Valdari government officials, military commanders, and security forces found themselves unable to respond to the crisis. Danny Martinez was monitoring communications from his laboratory on Earth, watching as reports poured in from across the galaxy. His sister's death was being avenged by thousands of people who had never met her, but who understood that an attack on one human was an attack on all humans. The most devastating aspect of the human assault was its personal nature. Every human agent was not following military orders, but was acting out of genuine grief and anger. They were not trying to conquer the Valdari Empire. They were trying to destroy it completely. Within 2 hours of the coordinated attack, the Valdari Empire was in complete chaos. Communication between worlds had been severed. Government systems were failing. Military forces were crippled. The Adida economy was collapsing, and everywhere the same message kept repeating, "This is for Lisa Martinez." Supreme Chancellor Zexhai finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had thought that executing one human would demonstrate Valdari power. Instead, he had awakened something that his empire was completely unprepared to face. The humans had not been conquered 50 years ago. They had been studying their conquerors, learning their weaknesses and preparing for the day when they would strike back. The Valdari Empire, which had ruled the galaxy for centuries, was falling apart. And it was falling to a species they had dismissed as primitive and harmless. The humans were proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. 6 hours after Lisa Martinez had died, the Valdari Empire no longer existed. What had taken centuries to build had been destroyed in less than a day by a species the Valdari had considered harmless pets. Supreme Chancellor Zexhai stood in his throne room as the last of his communication systems failed. The massive screens that once showed him reports from across his empire now displayed only static or the same repeating message. "This is for Lisa Martinez." His advisors had fled, his military had collapsed, and his government was powerless to stop what was happening. The realization of his mistake hit him like a physical blow. The humans had never been conquered. They had been pretending, learning, and preparing. Every human who had seemed to accept Valdari rule had actually been gathering intelligence about their weaknesses. The execution of Lisa Martinez had not been a demonstration of power. It had been the trigger for the most complete military defeat in galactic history. On Valdari Prime, human agents were systematically shutting down every system that kept the planet functioning. Power plants went offline. Water treatment facilities stopped working. Transportation networks ground to a halt. The capital of the greatest empire in the galaxy was being reduced to a primitive world by humans who had been living among them undetected for decades. Dr. Lucy Thompson walked through the abandoned corridors of the research facility where she had worked for 5 years. Her virus had completely destroyed the Valdari computer networks, but that had been only the beginning. Now she was placing explosive charges in key locations throughout the building. When she was finished, the facility that had housed centuries of Valdari scientific knowledge would be nothing but rubble. Captain Ben Rodriguez had captured the main Valdari fleet base with his single modified cargo ship. The Valdari defenders had been so shocked by the attack from what they thought was a friendly vessel that they had been unable to organize any effective resistance. Now Ben was using the base's own weapons to destroy the Valdari ships that were trying to respond to emergencies across the galaxy. Tony Garcia stood watching as the greatest shipyard in Valdari space burned around him. The modifications he had made to their ships over 6 years had created a cascade of failures that destroyed not just the vessels under construction, but the entire facility. Billions of credits worth of military hardware was being reduced to scrap metal. What made the destruction so complete was that it was happening everywhere at once. On every world where humans lived, Valdari infrastructure was being systematically destroyed by people who had intimate knowledge of how it worked. The Valdari had trusted humans with their technology, and the humans had used that trust to learn exactly how to break it. Steve Patterson had caused permanent damage to the fusion reactors on Nexus 7, the planet that had produced most of the Valdari military's advanced electronics would be dark for months. Without power, the factories were useless. Without the factories, the Valdari military could not replace the equipment that was being destroyed across the galaxy. Dr. Maria Santos had paralyzed the entire government of her world with biological agents. Valdari officials lay helpless in their offices while human technicians methodically destroyed every piece of government equipment. When the paralysis wore off, there would be no government left to recover. Carlos Rivera had done more than crash the Valdari economy. He had transferred the empire's entire treasury to accounts controlled by human resistance cells. The Valdari could not even pay their own military forces, let alone fund the massive reconstruction that would be needed to rebuild their empire. But the most devastating attack was not against any building or computer system. It was against the Valdari understanding of reality itself. For centuries, they had believed that they were the superior species, destined to rule the galaxy. Now they were discovering that they had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, maintained by the very humans they thought they controlled. Admiral Kate Martinez received reports from human agents across the galaxy. Every target had been hit. Every objective had been achieved. The Valdari Empire was not just defeated, it was completely destroyed. But Kate felt no satisfaction in the victory. Her daughter was still dead, and no amount of revenge could bring her back. Dr. Paul Martinez was working with other human scientists to develop antidotes to the biological agents they had used. The Valdari would recover from the paralysis, but they would wake up to find their empire gone. Paul wanted them to live with the knowledge of what they had lost and why they had lost it. Danny Martinez was coordinating the final phase of the operation from his laboratory on Earth. Human agents were broadcasting messages throughout the galaxy, explaining to other species what had happened and why. The message was simple. The Valdari Empire had fallen because they had killed an innocent human girl to demonstrate their power. The other species in the galaxy watched these events with a mixture of fear and amazement. The humans had just accomplished something that seemed impossible. They had destroyed the most powerful empire in galactic history in a matter of hours, and they had done it to avenge a single person. Supreme Chancellor Zexhai made one final attempt to contact his military commanders, but there was no response. The communication networks were destroyed. The commanders were either dead, paralyzed, or had fled. His empire was finished, and he was alone in his throne room with the knowledge that he had caused it all by underestimating a species he should have tried to understand. As night fell on Valdari Prime, the planet was dark for the first time in centuries. The great cities that had been the centers of galactic power were now empty shells. The beings who had ruled 847 star systems were now refugees in their own worlds. Captain Jake Sullivan, who had tried so desperately to save Lisa Martinez, was among the last humans to leave Kepler 442b. As his ship lifted off from the mining world where everything had started, he looked down at the Valdari facilities that were now smoking ruins. He thought about the young woman who had died there, and wondered if she would have approved of what had been done in her name. The answer came to him as he remembered Lisa's final words. "Tell my family I love them." The humans had not been acting as soldiers or conquerors. They had been acting as Lisa's family, and they had shown the galaxy what happened when someone hurt a member of that family. In the months that followed, historians would try to understand how such a complete victory had been achieved so quickly. The answer was both simple and terrifying. The humans had never stopped being human. They had submitted to Valdari rule not because they were weak, but because they were patient. They had used 50 years of apparent defeat to prepare for one moment of absolute victory. Lisa Martinez had been buried on Earth in a simple ceremony attended by her family and friends, but her death had changed the galaxy forever. The Valdari Empire was gone. Other species now looked at humans with a mixture of respect and fear, and throughout human space people remembered the young woman whose death had reminded everyone that humans would always protect their own. Danny Martinez stood at his sister's grave, reading the inscription that their parents had chosen. Lisa Martinez, beloved daughter, sister, and catalyst for change. She had wanted to study rocks and planets, but instead she had become the reason why humans were no longer ruled by anyone but themselves. The galaxy was a different place now. The humans had proven that they were not primitive or harmless. They were something far more dangerous. They were a species that would never forget and never forgive when someone hurt their family. And Lisa Martinez would always be remembered as the girl whose death brought down an empire.